Well, welcome everyone. I'm Susan Blum, as you know. I assume you know, because you know you're here to see me. Um, I'm really excited to be here today to share some information about the immune system. I have a lot of experience working to heal the immune system with people, to improve the functioning of the immune system. I wrote my first book, The Immune System Recovery Plan, back in 2013, and the protocols and the foundations and the whole view and understanding of how the immune system works is still stands from the information I shared in that book, because you really have to understand about how the immune system functions and what the immune cells need to work well and help it work better. And I have a specialization in the immune system, we'll put it that way. Now, my original book, The Immune System Recovery Plan, was written that book, what I had in mind as I wrote the book and the flavor and the common thread through the book is not only about repairing the immune system, but there's a lot of discussion about treating autoimmunity. And I am sure autoimmunity is an epidemic, so I am sure there are a lot of you here that have autoimmune conditions, autoimmune concerns or issues, or autoimmune disease. And everything we talk about applies to you. However, it also applies to everyone else, because really the approach to repairing the immune system for those with autoimmune is very similar to the approach used for anyone who wants to have a healthy immune system. You have to understand how the immune system works and then improve the foundations of the immune system. And I'm going to share with you exactly what I mean about that. So basically, I'm extending a big welcome to everybody who's here, whether you're autoimmune or you just want to improve the functioning of your immune system, you want to fight virus. So there's going to be some information I'm going to overlay also. That's in addition to the foundations of my book. There's going to be about antiviral and herbs, and then a discussion of who should take those, who shouldn't, like what's contraindicated if you have autoimmunity. So during this series, we will talk about antiviral herbs. And so I think we'll get started. Again, welcome. Really glad to be you're here and that I'm here. And again, this is part one of a 3-part series. And so just save your questions, write them down. And at the end of the series, I'm repeating myself, but can never repeat yourself too much. At the end of the series, you can join the Facebook group and put your questions there. All righty. So this is my slides. All right. So hopefully you should all be able to see me in the little corner in the top, hi, as well as the slides. And the other thing is we will also send you the slides, right? So you're going to get the video, but I usually also send the slides in a PDF form. And that way you don't have to take notes and you don't have to, worry about remembering things or writing them down. You will get to see this again in the video we send, as well as you'll get the slides in a PDF form. And so the information, there's some real details here that I'm sharing with you. You'll be able to go back and look at. Okay. And so I thought I would remind everyone what the video series is what I am going to be talking about, right? So today we're just laying the foundation and talking about basic functioning of the immune system. Today, you might be disappointed to know, but today we're not going to talk about treatment. I'm not going to really be laying out, okay, what should we do? Next time, we're going to talk about immune saboteurs, which we can also think of as the triggers and influences on the immune system. And as we start identifying what can go wrong or what might be going wrong in your body, identifying all the places where the environment comes into the body, and that could be toxins, that could be gut microbiome, that could be stress. There's all sorts of things that sabotage your immune system. We can talk about how to remedy that, right? Like what to do. And so next week, not next week, on Wednesday, which is in 2 days, I'll be back to talk about the triggers of what can damage the immune system and what to do about it. So on Wednesday, you're going to leave with definitely some concrete tips about what to do. And then on Friday, we're going to do the immune warriors. And what I mean by that is, what can we do as direct treatment what very specific, not so much working through the foundations of the immune system, but what very specifically do the immune cells need? How do we influence the functioning of the immune cells in a very direct way? How do we help your warriors work better? How do we help? What are the the great sort of tools that we're going to give you? And so there we're going to talk about something called oxidative stress, which is really important, something you might not have heard of before or you're confused about. And so that's going to be our third video in the series. And I'm going to speak very specifically about the antiviral herbs at that time as well. You know, specifically the kinds of things like mushrooms and elderberry and echinacea and astragalus and all of those herbs. And so that's what we're going to be doing. Okay. So today we're going to be talking just about basics. I'm laying the foundation for you today. Now, the first thing I want you to, so as you're reading all these things about coronavirus and the immune system and memory and what's really, is it antibodies, you know, all of that, that's really what I want to share with you today about, so you can understand or maybe be able to understand a little bit more about what you hear and see in the news. So in general, the immune system is divided into two main parts. One's called the innate immune system. Which is considered the first line of defense. It's ready to go. So innate, it's like built in. It doesn't need to learn anything. It doesn't care what virus it is. It's going to respond to every virus, right? It's built in. It's just it's like the early warning system. And then there's something called the adaptive immune system. The adaptive immune system actually is the part that has memory, and it gets primed. So the innate immune system is the front line. It actually presents all the new virus. Let's say if we use the virus as the example here, the innate immune system picks up the signals and picks up that there's a bad guy in town, and it presents it to the adaptive immune system, which are a different whole group of cells, and they start churning out a response that's based on specifically against that particular virus, right, or that particular infection, or that particular toxin, or the infections are the things that we commonly think of the immune system as responding to. But the adaptive immune system takes a little time. There's like a lag, and that's why nature gave us something that happens immediately, like we're ready, and then it gave us, while as we're taking care of the innate immune system is sort of doing its thing for the first 3 to 4 weeks, the adaptive immune system is busy sort of making guided missiles, making tailored response specific to that infection. Now, when I say the innate immune system, and that's what I mean, it needs no priming, right? It doesn't need to be sort of exposed, and it doesn't need to that's when we think of the word primed, it's like priming the pump. Like if you're pumping water, that's what I think where the word came from, like you have to pump a few times and nothing comes out, and then eventually the water comes out. So you have to prime the pump. But the innate immune system does not need any priming. What is considered a part of the innate immune system are your physical barriers, right? So this is where your skin is. This is the lining of your gut. This is why leaky gut can be a problem for people, which we'll talk more about next time. This is just the mucosal linings. And we do know that the COVID virus, the coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, invades the cells along the mucosa surfaces. And so those barriers are really, really important as the first line, but they can be damaged, right? And they can be breached, right? Those barriers can be breached. And so that's why the adaptive has to really come in quickly to help us. So, but those are the barriers. The other really important part of the innate immune system are the first line immune cells. You might have noticed in your white blood cell count, it's the neutrophils, something called macrophages, monocytes. Those are phagocytic kind of cells, and what they do is they gobble up the invaders. So they just sense somebody's there that shouldn't be, and they eat it, right? So they engulf it, and they also make enzymes directly that can destroy it. So, but that's the name of the kinds of cells. They're just a different group of cells that are considered part of the innate immune system. The other really important part of the innate immune system is something called natural killer cells. And I know even amongst my colleagues, there's some confusion about this. And I've written 2 books and I've done a lot of reading to try to make sure I'm clear on this. And so there's something called natural killer cells, capital N, capital K. Those are made actually in the bone marrow, and they're always circulating. They're always being released. They're really critical. These are really, really critical cells for protecting you. They're always circulating. They're a kind of a lymphocyte, but they're not in the usual, they're in its own pathway, and they're considered part of the innate immune system. They're not primed. They attack anything that looks foreign, and they're called the big natural killer cells, and they're really, really, really important for your defense. They release these chemicals called cytokines. So the way these cells work is they shoot out, you can think of it almost like fireworks, or bullets that they're releasing to kill the invader. And these kinds of bullets are called cytokines, leukotrienes. I mean, they have all sorts of names that we don't need to get into all the names, because that's not really as important as just knowing that they're releasing these bullets, okay? And when they release these chemicals, and histamine is one of them, especially in mast cells, release histamine, that's part of a defense. And when they release all these chemicals, it makes a lot of inflammation. And then the inflammation brings all these other proteins around that it's like calling all engines, and it's like there's a fire, and then it calls all the fire trucks. And so you get a lot of other cells coming that make a big inflammatory response. And that's all part of actually the way the tissues are trying to heal. The inflammation is sort of the collateral damage, that happens when you have the immune activation. So the immune cells get activated and they release all these chemicals, and there's collateral damage, which we feel as inflammation. In COVID, the collateral damage is almost thought to be worse than the actual antiviral. It's not the antiviral that's turning out to be the problem, it's the runaway train and the collateral damage that happens when there's runaway inflammation, as these immune cells get activated, overactivated, and don't turn off. And we're going to talk about that in a second. Now we switch gears into the adaptive immune system. Okay, so that was all the innate immune system, ready to go. You poke them, they release these chemicals, and they fight the bad guys. The adaptive immune system is really completely a different whole division. It's a completely whole army unto itself. I use the analogy with soldiers a lot. I like that. I think it's really helpful for most people to understand that the immune cells you think of them like soldiers. And in the adaptive immune system, this is the one that's primed. This is another whole kinds of cells you make, and they're called lymphocytes. And you've probably heard that name. But there's something called lymphocytes. And lymphocytes there's 2 different main kinds of lymphocytes. One's called T cells and the other's B cells. And they have memory, both of them. The B cells make antibodies, and the T cells make, I would say, we'll call them bullets. Okay, T cells make bullets, hand-to-hand combat. B cells make antibodies, but both of them have memory. And actually, it's really fascinating right now because there's a whole conversation happening in the controversy about antibodies, that it looks like the antibodies go away, but researchers are finding that people still have some defense and immunity to coronavirus. And so we're really starting to think and believe that there's actually the lymphocytes, the T cells, have memory, and that you get immunity against the coronavirus, not just from the antibodies, but from these other kinds of cells. And so that's really great news if that's true. They're finding that people's blood from 2015 who definitely had no exposure to this coronavirus. I was reading a study this morning that they found that in that blood, when you put the blood from those people and put the coronavirus there, they're having only 50%. Well, actually, they don't get sick. 50% have a positive response and sort of fight the virus. So 50% of people from blood in 2015 are fighting the virus, and it's not antibodies. It's actually just T cells. So that's really cool. So those are your soldiers. The other thing that's really important to remember, so when we talk about how to have a healthy immune system, we're going to talk about how you help the soldiers, but we also have to talk about the army bases where the soldiers develop, right? So what happens is there's all these army bases around the body. You can think of them as, most people are familiar with like the lymph nodes in your neck, right? Those bumps that you get after you have a sore throat, those lymph nodes. Lymph nodes are army bases. That's where T cells and B cells, that's where lymphocytes hang out and they wait for a bad guy, you know? And so what happens is the circulating lymphocytes or the circulating innate immune cells, they pick up that there's a virus, let's say, and they bring that information back to the army base, and it triggers an explosion of activity. And the army base starts churning out hundreds and hundreds and thousands of cells that are primed against that specific virus, right? So the virus is presented to the lymph node, and the lymphocytes are made specific against that virus. And that's why you feel swollen lymph nodes in your neck, for example, right? This is the one most people are familiar with. And it's just activation of that army base where the soldiers are being made and churned out to go fight the good fight. So the places where there's army bases is not just in the lymph nodes, and there's lymph nodes all over your body. They're in your abdominal cavity, in your armpit, you know, there's in your groin, there's lymph nodes everywhere. The other big places where lymphocytes have development happening and grow, something called the thymus gland, which is the primary organ before birth, and when babies are young, for making lymphocytes. The spleen, which is on the upper left side, opposite your liver, on the left side under your ribs, and something called the galt, and actually there's also the lung, but it's called gut-associated lymphoid tissue, because it turns out that 70% of your immune system, there's clusters of like lymphocytes, we call them Peyer's patches, but there's clusters of patches through your whole small and large intestine filled with, they're all army bases. And that really, our sense now is that some estimates are 70%, some are 80%, but of all the lymphoid tissue in your whole body, all the army bases, the majority of them are in your intestinal lining. And part of that is because you eat the outside world every day, right? So you have to have a lot of vigilance there, a lot of immune system function is there. The other really important place, and I don't have that on this slide, but it's called the lung-associated lymphoid tissue, well, the LALT, the LALT. And along the lining of the lungs are also all this lymphoid or all these army bases, because you breathe in the outside world every day. And so the lymphoid tissue in the lung gets really activated with COVID. And in the gut too, there's a lot of really clear evidence that there's a lot of GI, that COVID is affecting the gut for a lot of people too. And so, I have a little more on that. Actually, I think I just said it all on this slide. I always end up speaking ahead of myself. So this is sort of reinforce what I just said. The adaptive immune system, it's getting primed. These lymphocytes have memory, and they're going to remember, they're going to be targeted specifically against this virus. They are not generalists, they're specific, right? Whereas the innate immune system are more generalist. They're ready and they go after everything. The adaptive immune system, the lymphocytes, have a little lag. And so, but then they're very targeted. And so here's the list of the lymphoid tissue, which I talked about before. And, I do have lung-associated lymphoid tissue here. And so, again, I'm going to talk about T cells and B cells on the next slide, but, you know, the main lymphoid or lymphocytes are called T cells and B cells. And so hold that thought. Because now, very specifically, when we think about the immune response to viruses, right? Because that's the purpose of this video series, is to take everything I know, or everything I think I know, and apply it to COVID, right? And help you understand what we know about the immune system from just the research and understanding about how it functions, and autoimmunity, and just there's plenty of antiviral research in general, and understand what to do, right, or what we can do to help ourselves. And so we're focused for today on really understanding through the filter and the lens of viruses. So again, the lymphocytes are front line, and for antiviral, we're talking about these T cells and these B cells. Now, B cells are the ones you've read about for the past 6 months. They make immunoglobulins, right? And so those are antibodies. The word immunoglobulin is antibody, right? Same thing. An immunoglobulin is an antibody. Immunoglobulins, I like to think of them as they're not bullets, because bullets are just random. They're a guided missile, right? So those B cells, that the lymphocytes. So what happens is the lymphoid tissue where the B cells are hanging out, one of the innate cells comes along and presents this information to the B cell, and the B cell starts making guided missiles. They're very specifically, they have the name tag of COVID on it, right? They have the name tag of that particular virus, and the B cell itself starts replicating, and you start making tons of B cells. And all those B cells are programmed to make a guided missile against COVID or against a specific virus. And so that's what happens is that whole arm. So those are the B cells. Okay, so that's what happens definitely in the in the presentation, or if you get infected or you get exposed to the virus. Now, the first immunoglobulin that you make is something called IgM. It's the immediate one. It's almost like the innate. It's the version of the innate immune system for immunoglobulins. It comes out first, and it's more general. But then the IgG is the very, very specific tailored one, and that's why you don't see it come out for about 14 days. Minimum is 14 days is the earliest you'll see IgG start coming out after you're exposed to COVID or another virus. And so in the first 2 weeks you see IgM, but then you'll start seeing IgG because it's so programmed. That one is really primed to be specific, and it takes a little lag. Okay, and then that goes up, and that's the one that stays up, and we're waiting to see how long it stays up. It looks like it will eventually go down, and we just don't know how long, okay? But what we're thinking is not to despair if we find out the antibodies are going down from the B cells, because the T cells, which comes next, are actually jumping in and also contributing to your immunity. Now, T cells, I have a picture on the next slide, which will make it easier. I'm going to show you the T cells on the next slide. But they don't create antibodies. They're more hand-to-hand combat cells. But they're both activated against viruses, and they're both really, really important in the functioning of the immune system. Critical. You need to have them both working. And so, specifically for this virus, we really need both of them to clear it, obviously, or maybe not obviously, but it's obvious to me that, and anyone really looking at the immune system, that you really need to have both the B cells and the T cells working hand in hand really well. COVID, we know, and in fact, I told you before, they live in, the viruses in general go inside cells. That's what they do. That's why viruses are so hard to eradicate. Bacteria tend to float in your bloodstream or float around in the tissue, the majority of them, whereas viruses actually invade inside your cells, and they go inside. So the immune system, when it's trying to get at the virus, it actually is damaging your cells. And that's why the lungs are getting so much damage in coronavirus cases for people, because the lungs are the primary place, the majority of people get it through the lungs. And then when the immune system is trying to get at it, there's a lot of collateral damage, and that mucus and inflammation in the lungs is what makes it hard for people to not breathe, to breathe well. So this is the diagram I was promising you. The adaptive immune system, how am I in time? Oh, good. The adaptive immune system is the lymphocytes, like I said, and there's two categories. There's the B cells, you can see on the left, and they make antibodies. And then there's T cells, and there's a whole lot of T cells, okay? T cells, the dotted line which takes you to these cytotoxic T cells, those are the ones that have memory, and well, they all have their own memory, but the cytotoxic T cells are the direct antiviral cells. They're the ones who have hand-to-hand combat and will fire bullets and be activated and remember a virus. The overwhelming majority, a lot of the other T cells, the majority of T cells, I would say, are called T helper cells. And the helpers regulate everything. And they're super important. And I'm pointing that out here because you'll see that like the Th1 cells, which are the T helper 1s, they increase one kind of immune cell, the cytotoxic T cells. The T helper 2s tell the antibody cells to keep going, right? So they're influencers. They move, they sort of are the brakes and the brakes and the gas, and the brakes and the gas to help sort of, or maybe think of it like it's the leader of the leader of the orchestra, that they're busy sort of orchestrating the activity in the different wings or the different departments of the immune system. And so what I want to show you here before we move on to the next slide is something called the T regulator. And you see that's at the very bottom of the list. T regulators, they're the most important T cell or T lymphocyte for helping to turn off runaway inflammation. T regulators are critical for autoimmunity, right? And so my whole book, the Immune System Recovery Plan, I spend the whole book talking about how to improve the functioning of your T regulator cells. And by the way, this slide is from my book. So my book is just an amazing, the first few chapters are a whole primer on how the immune system works. And I really I'm focused on talking about T regulator cells because you really want to improve how well the regulators work, because what happens in autoimmunity is you can have too much, the immune system can get overactive against, yourself. The immune system can turn on itself, and so you want to turn it off. So the T regulators are the suppressors. They turn off an immune activation that's not helpful anymore, right? And so runaway inflammation, which you see in COVID, or activity against yourself, which you see in autoimmunity, T regulators are the critical players. And so improving the functioning of your T regulators are really critical. And so that's really what I want to show you, on our list of things for me to share with you about how to improve the functioning of your immune system overall. The goal is to definitely make sure your T regulators are working really well. And so my last slide, just sort of summarizing this, is that these T lymphocytes, how I wrote here, you see the T regulators are the off switch. And so once activated, the T regulator cells help to turn off the immune response and keep balance. Impaired function of T regulators is associated with autoimmunity, persistent inflammation, and poor immune function. And so we really want overall to make sure all your soldiers are good, but we also want to employ strategies that are going to help your T regulators work better. I mean, for me, I'm a functional medicine at the core. I'm an all-in functional medicine person, which is understanding how things are functioning and how do we help improve the function. And so, as I'm wrapping up, what does it mean to have a healthy immune system, right? Because that's what we want. So a healthy immune system means it's busy doing its job. It protects you from infections and toxic invaders. It clears away dead and abnormal cells that develop internally. And so there's all that collateral damage that happens in the body, the immune system, and your cells die. It's a natural part of life. The macrophages, they all have to grab and pull the immune cell, they have to clear out debris. The immune system needs to understand what's foreign and what is self. It needs to turn on when it's needed and turn off when the task is done. And so this brings us to the next step in our video series, right? How do we help recovery and resiliency of your immune system? How do we help it be resilient and strong when invaders come? And how do we help it recover as it's fighting the good fight? So in order to make sure there's good recovery and resiliency, we want to make sure your soldiers have enough antioxidants and nutrients to recover after the battle. Antioxidants and oxidative stress, remember on that first slide, that's going to be our third video session, is going to be very focused on oxidative stress, damage that the immune system takes, the soldiers take, and the need for antioxidants and how to eat food, why diet is so important there. Recovery and resiliency is also grounded in making sure the army bases are primed and ready. I mean, this is critical for resiliency, right? And so this is where we focus on the development of new immune cells, right? And making sure the immune system is continuing to develop in a healthy way to pour out more soldiers as needed. And so the army bases, so in order to really, so the army bases are very tied to like immune foundation, which I'm going to share with you in a sec. in the last slide, but we really want to have a strong immune foundation. And so where's your immune foundation, right? What does it mean? What is that? So number one, I already said food and antioxidants. That's sort of the recovery of your immune cells themselves. For the soldiers' function, you need to be feeding them a certain way. And but for the other additional pieces for the foundation of your T regulator cells and the development T regulator cells develop in that lymphoid tissue, you want to make sure your stress hormones are in good shape. You want to make sure your gut microbiome is good. We want to make sure you have a low toxin load. Toxins, problems in the gut, too much stress hormones will damage your immune foundations and the development in those lymphoid tissues and the health of those T regulators. These are the saboteurs that we're going to talk about in our next video. And so you can see in my book, which is the Immune System Recovery Plan, like I said, this was really my passion when I wrote this book. And you'll see on the cover it says a 4-step program to treat autoimmune disease, but this is really about a 4-step program for healing your immune system, for improving your immune function. It's not just about autoimmune, it's the same principles. So we're going to take this as the foundation of the information I'm giving you about improving T regulators and all that, and I'm going to add on additional information in this video series, as you can see, especially in the third video where we talk about oxidative stress and antiviral herbs and specific strategies that are antiviral. But next time, when we talk about immune saboteurs, that's going to really be more focused on those foundations of a healthy immune system. We're going to talk about all these, we're going to talk about stress, gut, toxins, how they are involved in immune function, what can go wrong and what you can do about it. And so that's it. So we're here for you, Blum Center. I'm going to stop sharing. Anyone who wants to learn more about us, go to my website, blumcenterforhealth.com. As you know, I'm back. All right, see, I always talk much longer. I'm glad I only had 10 slides. Good to see everybody. I'm going to jump. And so my reminder is this. Reminder is next time we'll talk about the triggers for a dysfunctional immune system. We call it the immune saboteurs. Save your questions. I'm not going to answer them during these 3 videos. Save your questions, and we're going to give you a whole process for answering for how to get your questions answered at the end of the 3 series. Okay, we're going to send you an email. It'll have a link to the Facebook group. I said this at the beginning. I'm saying it again for those of you joining late. And have no fear. We're committed to being here for you and to provide a way for you to get all the answers you're looking for. So I look forward to next time giving you part 2, and it was great to spend this lunch hour with you. Stay well, save your notes, and I will see you next time.